everyone. Today I'm going to talk about Nichols' speech on the negative impact of the anti-vaccination movement on society. So basically this speech claims that the anti-vaccine movement, which basically this refers to parents that refuse to give their kids vaccines because they feel it's harmful to them, is causing harm to, harm to society. So basically, this speech does provide a lot of statistics on how the uncommon diseases like whooping cough and measles are increasing in cities all across the country. But unfortunately, it focuses too much on the anti-vaccination movement and doesn't really provide evidence for why that movement is causing all these diseases to increase. So my refutation claim is that this speech doesn't have enough evidence to show that the anti-vaccination movement is the main cause of the increase of uncommon diseases in the United States. So my main points for this is that the argument really doesn't fulfill its necessary burden of proof. Number two, vaccines aren't fully accessible to everyone, so not everyone may have like a choice to be able to get the vaccines. And my third point is that also foreign-born immigrants who may have lower vaccination standards may not have a complete vaccination background, which can also influence these uncommon diseases and could cause them to increase. So on to my first point. So as far as the burden of proof goes, the evidence, like I said, it shows a huge increase in uncommon diseases, but there aren't any survey statistics on how many people refuse to vaccinate their kids versus maybe people who can't do it because of they lack the medical coverage, or maybe they're foreign born, or maybe they have a medical reason that they can't get a vaccine, or perhaps even negligence of getting the vaccine. So it kind of begs this question, for instance, how many people do not vaccinate because of other various reasons, right? So on my next point, vaccines may not be fully accessible to everyone. So there are two ways to be able to get a vaccine. One, you get it through your primary care physician, and secondly, you get it through a vaccine clinic. So for people who are perhaps underinsured or uninsured, they may not even have a primary care physician that they can see or see conveniently. So they'd have to go through a vaccine clinic, which can, depending on the clinic, can take a very long time and can be very inconvenient. So people may not even be able to get to them. So as of 2015, about 10.5% of the non-elderly population, basically people under age 55, were considered uninsured. Now, ever since the Affordable Care Act was put in place, the amount of people who are uninsured has dropped by 6.5%, but that still doesn't account for people who are underinsured, and they still have a huge inconvenience of being able to see their healthcare physician. So it could take some people maybe a week or even a month to be able to see their physician. So that could have a huge damper on getting vaccines. So, okay, so also, if people have to keep track of their vaccines on their own, they may not be able to keep as good of a record as a doctor would, so they may miss certain vaccines and may expose their children to certain diseases. Also, for my last point, foreign-born immigrants from other countries can also influence these, can also cause increases in uncommon diseases. So, obviously we know that this is has a very positive, this country here has a huge increase in immigrants every year. So as far as immigrants that were born outside of this country, from 1990 to 2010, the percentage of foreign-born immigrants rose from 7.9% to 12.9%, according to the US Census Bureau. And as of 2014, this percentage of foreign-born has increased to about 13.3% of the population, according to the Migration Policy Institute. So the increase in these immigrants kind of makes you wonder that it's possible that immigrants coming from third world countries may not have the proper vaccination background and may expose themselves to measles or polio or tuberculosis or other diseases like that. So, and also having areas of, also a lot of immigrants are known to live in areas that are of lower socioeconomic status, so they may become hotspots for these more uncommon diseases. So just to conclude, just to summarize my points, the speech lacks evidence that the anti-vaccination movement itself causes an increase in diseases like this. because burden of proof isn't properly satisfied. The vaccines aren't fully accessible to everyone, and foreign-born immigrants are more susceptible to infection, and their numbers are increasing quite steadily. So the rise of uncommon diseases is definitely concerning and should be dealt with, but it's important not to dwell on one specific movement that is only one of many factors that are influencing this complicated problem. So if we want to prevent disease and keep our children healthy, it's very important that we factor in everything that's involved in this issue in order to deal with it properly. Thank you.
Got the envelope for me? All right, thank you. All right, well, you start off pretty clearly with your own claims, secondary claims. I don't know that they ever respond directly to the arguments that the advocate presented, so I think there need to be a little bit more clash there. Your burden of proof argument suggests that they don't answer a series of questions, and I think you asked some pretty good questions, but you don't really demonstrate how important those questions are, and of course, you're not documenting any of those questions either, so I think that that's a little bit problematic. It kind of puts you into that position where, you know, back to the kids arguing on the playground. Well, you didn't say it. Well, neither did you. Well, whose responsibility is it to document this? You're in essence demanding that they document an exception, and so I think you need to provide some evidence here that it would be likely to be coming from some other places. The argument about health care availability I thought was pretty reasonable. This is the one place where you did have some data to support your position based on what people's coverage is, and that there's a limited, you know, we got a large chunk of people who are not covered, and even though the Affordable Care Act exists, it's only reduced the number of people who are uncovered a very small percentage, and they may still be underinsured, so it's unlikely that they're likely going to be getting those vaccines as easily or as widely as we might hope. And then I thought that you introduced a couple of other potential sources of holes in our vaccination protocol. Immigrants and people living in poverty or without access to health care issues. Both of those I think are good claims. They'd be better if they had some evidence behind them. The one thing that you have evidence on is the proportion of immigrants that is increasing. What you don't have is any information that suggests that the vaccination protocols in other countries are less extensive, or that there are people who are immigrating here either legally or illegally who are likely to have not had access to these kinds